Thank you, Dan. It was very enlightening. Next is Dr. Carpentier. So I was trying to write his bio, and he sent me 4 pages of curriculum vitae, and I couldn't make any sense out of it. I still can't make sense out of it. Well, I'm going to add a little bit here. Dr. Carpentier was born in Canada, and attended school in British Columbia. And he went to Ohio State University to do his medical residency and internship. And after that, he wasn't sure what he was going to do. He had studied aviation medicine. And so he got a call one day. He thought he was going to go back to Canada and just be, a typical Canuck, watching whatever they watch on TV. But he got a call from some strange agency called NASA, and they said, hey, we're doing something down here in space. In fact, you might like to come help us with our microgravity issues. And I don't think he knew what he was getting into, but he said, sure, why not? Sounds like fun. So he reported for duty at Johnson Space Center just as the Gemini program was getting started, right after they wrapped up Mercury and they were going into the 2-man Gemini program, and he reported down there. And as such, he had a little extra flair about it, as opposed to just a research doctor. He liked being out on the leading edge of the spear, shall we say. So in fact, he did 3 Gemini recoveries, not just back in the lab. He was actually in a helicopter that flew out from the aircraft carrier to raise the astronauts up and bring them back to the aircraft carrier. So he did 3 Gemini recoveries in the mid-60s. Then, later on, when the Apollo program got started, he also was tasked with studying basically the medical issues, the health issues with the Apollo program. So he was involved with the recovery of Apollo 7, which was an Earth orbit mission, then Apollo 11, which went somewhere else, and then Apollo 14, which went to the same somewhere else. So he was involved with 2 of the lunar landing missions, Apollo 11 and Apollo 14, and that's 2 of the 3 missions that actually had quarantines afterwards. So we're going to hear from the guy that helped Neil Armstrong up from the ocean into the helicopter after he came back from the moon, who locked himself voluntarily into that Airstream trailer over there for a number of days with Neil and the crew, who volunteered to stay in quarantine for another couple of weeks in the Johnson Space Center, and lastly went on the worldwide tour with the Apollo astronauts. So with that, let me introduce you to Bill Carpentier, and he's going to stall for a minute while I put his slideshow up.
Thank you, Bob. If I may borrow a phrase from Neil Armstrong, I was privileged to be able to participate in one great adventure. And that adventure, of course, was the Apollo program, specifically the flight of Apollo 11. Now, when Bob asked me to come to this event, I was a little bit hesitant because I thought it would be difficult to say something about Neil that hasn't been said more eloquently by others who are more articulate than I am. But Bob asked me if I would provide some personal insights of Neil and maybe some anecdotal stories about the Apollo 11 flight recovery and the ensuing trip around the world. So I hope I can contribute something to understanding what a truly unique guy Neil Armstrong was. Now, I grew up in a small town. It was much smaller than Wapakoneta, Ohio, where Neil grew up. Everybody knew everybody in this town. And I had 2 great siblings, an older sister and a younger brother, but I was the oldest son. And my father expected that I should behave in a manner that lived up to his expectations of rules that he set down. I didn't always do that, and I got into trouble periodically. But every once in a while I thought, wouldn't it have been great to have an older brother who could have paved the way and I could have had an easier road to follow? But I never met anybody that could really fulfill that role until I met Neil Armstrong. Neil was a few years older than I. He was also bigger, stronger, smarter, more logical, and a bit less rebellious than I was. He was able to analyze problems, come to conclusions, and develop a solution better than any single person that I have ever met. I began my career with NASA at what was then the Manned Spacecraft Center about a couple of months before the first Gemini flight. And my introduction to the life of an operational flight surgeon was to train with the Navy frogmen to be able to jump into water in case any astronaut coming back from space should require any medical assistance or treatment. So I spent a lot of time at sea on aircraft carriers similar to the Hornet. But that job also required that I spend a lot of time doing the pre-flight evaluations, so I got to work with almost all of the Gemini astronauts and most of the Apollo astronauts. Now, I first met Neil during the Gemini program. He was a command backup pilot for Gemini 5. I did not get to know him very well during that program, except by reputation. Neil had an incredible background, as you've heard. He's a Navy fighter pilot, combat veteran, and a test pilot. He was the only member of the Gemini group of astronauts to have flown the rocket-powered X-15, so he was very well known for his technical competence. So for this reason, he was chosen to be the commander of the first Gemini docking, where it docked with the Agena. And as he said, there was a problem. They docked with the Agena, the spacecraft got out of control, and they went into an uncontrollable spin. But Neil was very calm, cool. He could figure out anything. He figured out how to get undocked, how to stabilize the spacecraft, and make an emergency landing in the Pacific. Now, another time when his reputation for technical competence was clearly demonstrated was when he was flying the lunar lander research vehicle, as that's already been talked about. Now, this vehicle had an engine failure or a malfunction, but he was able to stabilize it long enough and eject just seconds before it crashed. But following that incident, I did get a quote from Neil that I have used very many times in my life, and that quote was, "That scared the hell out of me, and I'm furious." But Apollo 11 was designated to be the first lunar landing mission in mid-January of 1969, and then I was appointed to be the crew flight surgeon. But I got to spend quite a bit of time with him during the training up to their liftoff. And one of the things that we had to work out is how we were going to handle the quarantine requirements. So we had to work on the procedures and practice them so that we would not break the quarantine requirements. The quarantine was set up because of the remote possibility that there should be some alien organism on the moon that would be brought back to Earth. So I remember another time during that period, another quote that Neil made, and I think this one made it to the newspapers and even Life magazine, and it became one of my son's favorite quotes from Neil. When he was asked about his training program, he stated, "I believe that every man is born with a finite number of heartbeats, and I'm not about to waste mine running around the block." Now, a few days before liftoff, I had to go up the gantry and into the spacecraft to get swab samples for the microbiology program, because they wanted to make sure that anything that was in the spacecraft when they came back was there when they went up and not something new that they brought back from the moon. So Neil took me up the gantry and helped me get all of the samples. Now, this is what the interior of the Apollo spacecraft looked like. This was taken during the simulation. And I said to Neil, you know, I'm not a very big guy. I don't eat very much. I could slide right under that middle seat and maybe hitch a ride to the moon. He was not taken with that idea. So on July the 16th, they launched without him. And on July the 20th, they began their descent to the lunar surface. And on the way down, we noticed that they were passing landmarks a few seconds early, and they were about to land many miles from their projected target. Then they got a computer overflow alarm and saw the computer's landing target was a boulder field strewn with boulders and right beside a large crater. But Neil was the guy who was always calm, always in control. He took over manual control of the spacecraft. And with Buzz Aldrin calling out altitude and velocity data, he was able to fly over the boulder field and make a safe landing on the moon. Now, Gene Cernan told a story that he heard from Neil, that he was asked after the flight, how did he feel when he was coming in for a landing and with only a few seconds of fuel left? And Neil stated, well, we all know when the gauge says empty, there's usually a gallon or two left in the tank. So 6.5 hours after landing, Neil descended the ladder and made the first step onto the lunar surface. Then recovery occurred on July the 24th. And this is what the command module looked like coming back to Earth after the flight from the outside. And this is what it looked like from the inside. Now, we were, they had to don these biological isolation suits because of the quarantine requirements. After they got these on, everything was disinfected, came up into helicopter 66 right at them, and flew back to the Hornet into the mobile quarantine facility to start quarantine. And this is what the mobile quarantine facility looked like from the outside, and that's what it looked like from the inside. Now, I had many tasks to perform during those 3 days that we spent in the MQF, but Neil's curiosity spread to the medical procedures and tests that we were doing. And of all the astronauts that I ever worked with, Neil was the most curious and also the most helpful. He always wanted to help out, and he always wanted to understand what was being learned about the changes in the human body as a result of spaceflight.